Hey guys, welcome to Out of Ink. I'm the Archivist, and like most people, I grew up with Peter Parker as Spider-Man. I loved Spider-Man as a kid. I loved reading the Sunday newspaper comic strips of Spider-Man and renting the 1994 Spider-Man TV show from Blockbuster. Something about Spidey and his rogues sparked my imagination. And when I started reading comics as a teenager, I just loved reading Spider-Man. I was blown away by everything I learned, and it was at the height of my fresh obsession with comics when Spider-Man 700 happened. For those of you who missed it, this was the book where Spider-Man died. Obviously it didn't stick, but at the time this was big enough to make the news. To this day, I think Spider-Man 700 was one of the most beautiful and touching farewells to a character, and at the time I believed that was it for Peter. Oh, to be young again. Seriously, if you can read this book, you should, because it is an S-tier send-off to a beloved character. Besides being one of the best death comics I've ever read, Spider-Man 700 also put a very controversial move in motion. Due to medical complications explained in issue 600 and a body swap that happened in book 698, Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, took over Peter Parker's body and vows now that Spider-Man is dead, he shall be the better Spider-Man. The superior Spider-Man, if you will. I never expected Otto to win, or to have a change of heart that he did. But for some reason, I believed with all my heart and soul that this promise meant something, and that Otto was going to do his best. However, I found myself disappointed and outraged by the new Spider-Man books, and I quit for a while. So, after all this time, I'm returning to take a look at the first 5 issues of Superior Spider-Man to see if I missed anything in my blind rage. I am going to be going a little more in depth than usual, so there are spoilers ahead. Superior Spider-Man starts off strong, with Otto basically settling into Peter's life. This meets somewhere between being hilarious, awkward, and a little creepy, as you can't escape the bizarre reality of Otto being an older super genius put into the body of a younger, superpowered Parker. This must have been liberating for Dan Slott, the writer and madman who set up this arc over the course of 100 books before finally getting to do it. At this point, Slott had been writing Amazing Spider-Man for close to 200 issues and had done a lot for Peter, so getting this chance to flip the script and do something a little different must have been really nice. These differences are really apparent when Ghost Peter shows up. Ghost Peter appears at the end of issue 1, possibly being some combination of Peter's soul and subconscious brain kicking around in the back of his hijacked mind. Ghost Peter's presence only highlights the differences between Otto and Peter, and probably inflamed readers who were upset that Peter was dead, like me. At the time, the appearance of Ghost Peter was upsetting to me because it just made it more obvious how much had changed. But I took comfort in his presence because it was a hope that things could go back to normal. Looking back at this was not a good way to handle this, and I think I understand why Ghost Peter was here. While I do think he was actually there to aggravate people and exaggerate how nuts everything was, GP was also there to provide reflection on both Otto's actions and his own. This comparison between Octavius and Parker was not only showcased by Ghost Peter, but it was also shown in the art. The art does a lot to show off how Peter really isn't himself. These 5 books had 2 different artists, Ryan Stegman and Giuseppe Camuncoli, and both of them do a great job conveying this change. Camuncoli gives us a very sturdy Spider-Man in issues 4 and 5, as well as some excellent body language and framing that is integral to the feelings of tension in these books. Stegman, the artist for issues 1 through 3, focuses on the use of shadows and facial expressions to show Otto's presence, which is shown especially well in issue 2. I never thought plain old Peter's body could look so sinister, but here we are. Speaking of issue 2, this book is very uncomfortable. In this book, Otto starts trying to improve Peter's life, which means him finding ways to become more efficient as Spider-Man and aggressively trying to get together with Mary Jane. On one hand, Otto is hilariously out of touch, but on the other hand, he is super creepy. I will tell you straight out, Otto visiting his warped version of Peter's memories about MJ made my skin crawl. He's such a dirty old man, but in the end, Otto does the responsible thing and decides to leave MJ alone because if he wants to protect her, he can't be with her. This was yet another time the book surprised me. Aside from trying to improve Peter's love life, Otto invents a lot of great things to help himself be a better Spider-Man, while doing other amazing things to keep Peter's employers at Horizon Labs happy. A lot of these gadgets are brilliant, and they highlight one of the greatest strengths of this book. This is showing the supervillain approach to being a superhero. This is a concept that I love and really wish was explored more. Otto knows how criminals behave and applies his experiences. Otto invents the absolutely adorable spider bots to survey the city and keep him informed on the crimes, a very Big Brother style move. He actually enlists the police to help him handle things. He's basically Batman, even down to Mayor J. Jonah Jameson, Yes, you heard me right, this was what was going on in the time, trying to install a spider signal that Otto absolutely hates. Out of these first 5 issues, issue 3 is my favorite. To me, it showed Otto's potential as a hero very well, and he had 2 great character moments. The first is when Otto discovers that Peter never got his doctorates and returns to college. This moment teaches us about both Ock's ego and Peter's skewed sense of responsibility. Otto sees Peter as someone who wasted his potential, and I don't like to admit it, but he does have a good point. Peter often screwed over his personal and professional life and added to his own problems because of his overinflated sense of responsibility, or lack thereof. While great power and great responsibility are one of the cornerstones of Peter Parker's character and why we love him, it's something that sometimes gets out of hand, and it's interesting that Otto of all people calls out Peter for this. The second moment is when Otto reunites with Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture. Otto tries to talk Toomes into surrender, as they used to be good friends during their run as members of the Sinister Six. But then Otto discovers that the Vulture's henchmen are children. This shakes Otto to his core, as even someone as despicable as Otto Octavius would never intentionally hurt a child due to his own trauma of being abused by his father. Upon this revelation, Otto realizes the kind of person Vulture really is and flies into a rage, brutally beating and forcing him to crash into the spider signal. May it rest in pieces. It was around this point in Superior Spider-Man where I started to see Otto Octavius as a person. It never occurred to me until I was writing my script, but I never actually knew anything about Otto as a person. In my mind, he was just your average garden variety mad scientist. But now we really start to get to know him outside of the robot arms and egomania. We see this at his first meeting with Anna Marie in issue 4. Anna Marie is a brilliant student who offers to tutor Otto in their physics class and is Otto's love interest. Although Otto is rather overconfident of his abilities, he is not above sharing his information and is shown to be a bit sentimental despite all his logic. Unfortunately, this character development also shows that Otto is not afraid of tough moral decisions. This was the Massacre arc. These were the comics that led me to turning away from Superior Spider-Man altogether. In issues 4 and 5, Massacre, a villain from the Big Time Spider-Man arc, returns. He escapes from Ravencroft, aka Marvel's Markham Asylum. On his way out, he kills Dr. Ashley Kafka, one of Spider-Man's allies and friends. He begins spreading terror throughout New York City through killing and taking of hostages. Otto's newfound sense of responsibility urges him to find and stop Massacre once and for all. By using a combination of Peter's memories, help from a few others, and his own tech, Otto is fighting smarter. Everything looks good, but once Otto confronts Massacre and things start going wrong, Otto loses it. Otto holds Massacre at gunpoint. The crowd of hostages call for Massacre's blood. Massacre cries, finally experiencing feeling after losing all sense of emotion. Ghost Peter tries to talk Otto down, but Otto pulls the trigger. He executes Massacre. I remember the feeling of my heart dropping into my stomach when I read this comic. Spider-Man just killed a man. Not only did he kill a man, he did it with a gun. I remember anxiously waiting for issue 6 to roll around so that we could get the reveal that Massacre was just in a coma, or however they could backpedal out of it, because Otto Octavius or not, the Spider-Man wasn't a killer. But that never came. This was my breaking point. If it hadn't been for that feeling of disbelief that came with it, I would have dropped Superior Spider-Man sooner. I ended up dropping out around book 13, but going back to this arc after all this time, I realize now that I couldn't have been more wrong about the beginning of this book. The start was bold, but it had to be because with a premise like Dr. Octopus taking over Spider-Man's body, you can't chicken out halfway. The die is cast, you're just along to see where it lands. This book knew people were going to be upset by what it did, but Superior Spider-Man was out of fucks to give, and it wasn't about to buy the equipment to go make some new ones. And I'd be lying if I said that I didn't respect that. I loved rereading the Superior Spider-Man books, and I regret not sticking it out and reading as much as I could. I hope you guys will check it out and tell me in the comments if you want to see more, because I would love to read the rest of the Superior Spider-Man comics and talk about them with you guys. On that note, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time, here on Out of Ink.
Well, off to visit your mother.